sort of this lone soldier here, okay? We went to Iowa with you, we went to New Hampshire, and we're going, I don't know, Steve, it ain't looking good. And you said he's just getting warmed up.
Yeah.
Talking about Joe Biden, how do you feel today?
Well, elated, but I have to agree with what Mike Mamoli said. Look, we always knew that Iowa and New Hampshire were going to be very tough for us. That was a reality. Right after Iowa, New Hampshire, there was a conference call with Biden supporters where the vice president and Mrs. Biden got on and said, look, no surprise here, no shock. We now go into a battleground that is more demographically favorable to us. We knew the game plan was first or second in Nevada, and then go to South Carolina and try and rack up a victory. Here's what we didn't know: a 28-point victory in South Carolina. The impact of Jim Clyburn's endorsement, a fiery speech by Biden that night, which created this massive earned media push that helped him within 72 hours. Breathtaking turn within 72 hours. But there was always a strategy there, and you have seen the execution of that strategy.
Congressman Crowley, Vice President Biden won in places he never even set foot in. Virginia by 30 points, a state where he spent 170 grand. Compare that to Mike Bloomberg, who spent $5 million. People have said this campaign, this election is all about money and personality. Bloomberg money, Bernie's personality. But at the end of the day, were last night's results, all the people that went out, was it about heart and comfort?
I think you have to add to that Massachusetts, not an office, not an ad in Massachusetts. And Joe Biden, took that state away from Bernie and Elizabeth Warren and Mike Bloomberg, who was born and raised in Massachusetts. Joe Biden did not have a good night last night. Joe Biden had a great night last night. It's been one of the most interesting 72 hours or thereabouts I've ever witnessed in politics. The orchestration, the execution of winning the Clyburn endorsement, I think everything led from that, the excitement from that. It has just been phenomenal. I do think that Joe Biden, he's not a nobody. Joe Biden is the former vice president of the United States. People are familiar with him. And I think, Stephanie, what it really shows is the desire to win and to defeat Donald Trump in November is so overwhelming. People are coalescing around the person that they believe will be that standard bearer for our party and who can actually defeat Donald Trump.
Well, then, Congressman Crowley, talk to us about the push for a revolution. You got unseated by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, someone who is seen as one of the leaders of the progressive wing of your party. She endorsed Senator Sanders early, and she's very much behind this idea of a revolution. When you look at last night, did the Democratic Party reject that idea?
I think Democrats want to win. That's what they want to do. They want to win. And I don't think, Stephanie, I don't think you really can take my district and what happened to me and really bring that to the country and say, see this happen in Queens and the Bronx. It's going to happen everywhere else. So I think the complexities of my election, I think, people will look at that from years to come and examine it. But having said that, I think the message last night is people aren't about a revolution as much as they want to defeat Donald Trump. And they believe right now, from the statistics we've seen, they believe that Joe Biden is that vehicle.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.